MaMa Experimental Theatre Club is an off-Broadway theatre founded in 1961 by Ellen Stewart, and named in reference to her. Located on Manhattan's Lower East Side, the theatre grew out of Stewart's tiny basement boutique for her fashion designs. The boutique's space acted as a theatre for fledgling playwrights. At night, MaMa has evolved during its over 50-year history into a world-renowned cultural institution. Background: in its earliest days, MaMa was a theatre dedicated to the playwright, encouraging young playwrights and primarily producing new plays, including works by Paul Foster, Jean-Claude Van Italy, Lanford Wilson, Sam Shepard, Adrienne Kennedy, Harvey Fierstein, and Rochelle Owens. MaMa also acted as an international ambassador for off-Broadway playwriting by touring downtown playwriting abroad during the 1960s. MaMa is the only theatre of the 1960s off-Broadway movement's four core theatres that continues to thrive today. The other three off-Broadway theatres that composed this score included Joe Chino's Café Chino, Al Carmine's Judson Poets Theatre, and Ralph Cook's Theatre Genesis. More than any other off-Broadway programmer, Stewart reached out beyond the East Village location, forcing new trends rather than following. MaMa says about its mission that it is dedicated to the people who make art, and it is to them that we give our support with free theatre and rehearsal space, lights, sound, props, platforms, and whatever else we have that they can use to create their work. We want them to feel free to explore their ideas, and translate them into a theatrical language that can communicate to any person in any part of the world. Beginnings: Ellen Stewart and the Pushcart. Ellen Stewart is the spirit of MaMa. She is its guardian, janitor, fundraiser, press agent, tour manager, conceptual leader. She is the guts of the place. To understand this theatre, one must first know Ellen Stewart. Stewart worked as a fashion designer at Saks before founding the theatre. Stewart was inspired by her mentor, Papa Abraham Diamonds, an owner of a fabric shop on the Lower East Side. Papa Diamonds told Stewart that everyone needs a pushcart to serve others, and that everyone needs their own personal pushcart as well. Stewart had a revelation about his advice during a trip she took to Morocco. As a result, Stewart decided to open a boutique for her fashion designs that would also serve as a theatre for her foster brother and playwright Fred Lightson. Playwright Paul Foster. On October 18, 1961, Stewart paid the $55 rent on a tenement basement at 321 East 9th Street to start this boutique theatre in the off-Broadway community. A theatre for the playwright as opposed to Café Chino, which was more about a specific atmosphere or clientele. MaMa's primary focus in its early history was the playwright. In fact, Stewart didn't read the plays, she was interested in people, and relied on what she calls beeps, or clicks, a kind of hunch she gets when meeting people and deciding whether or not to do a project. In the early years, Stewart even housed and fed playwrights and directors whenever she could. She truly acted as a mother, as Jean-Claude Van Italy remembers in his first meeting with Stewart. "I never could have expected the warmth of Ellen's milk. She basically said to me, 'Honey, you're home. This space is for you to put on plays.'" The combination of her kindness and her smile and the beauty of the space were overwhelming. Ellen broadcast to the world that we were doing something important. We were her baby playwrights, and she sat on us like eggs that would hatch. She told us that what we were doing mattered, and we wouldn't get confirmation on that anywhere else. In a 1997 interview, Stewart echoed this sentiment. "I call them my kids. I'm very fortunate. They know they can come to see me whenever they want. They don't need to have appointments. And they call me on the phone from all over the world. I'd be a zero without my kids. They stay with me, and many have been very fortunate in their later careers." Not only did Stewart create a nurturing environment for the playwright, but MaMa's space itself was an appealing blank canvas in its early years. As Jean-Claude Van Attali said of the MaMa space, it imposed no aesthetic, made no artistic suggestions. Thus, MaMa was considered by many playwrights to be the most inviting space of the off-Broadway theaters. In 1963, Stewart created a policy of presenting new plays only, a new play each week. At this time, she also began ringing a bell before each production, welcoming the audience with "Welcome to MaMa," dedicated to the playwright and all aspects of the theatre. "Tonight we present." Stewart believed that young playwrights needed the ability to explore without the fear of professional criticism too early in their career. New playwrights shouldn't be judged in the same manner as more practiced playwrights. Stewart herself said that artists that didn't feel experienced enough to go to Café Chino came to MaMa instead. In producing new works, Stewart was truly creating a place for playwrights to work and grow. By seeing what happened when their plays were actually performed, playwrights learned from practical, collaborative experiences. MaMa and Café Chino. Stewart denies that her café emulated Chino's. However, Chino and Stewart did have a close relationship. In fact, the first documented production at MaMa, One Arm, an adaptation of a Tennessee Williams story, was actually a transfer from Café Chino. Perhaps the best way to understand Chino and Stewart's relationship is to consider their different producing models. Chino rarely extended a run, as he didn't want to affect the next play's opening. So if playwrights wanted more runs and exposure for a popular work, they went to MaMa. There was an unspoken agreement between Chino and Stewart that the plays done at either of their cafes could go on to second performances at the other. When Café Chino burned down in 1966, MaMa hosted benefit shows in order to aid Café Chino. After Chino's death, Ellen Stewart was offered by Joe Chino's family to take over Café Chino, but she declined. Locations and growth. Café MaMa's first home, the basement at 321 East 9th Street, was fixed up over 9 months. During this time, the neighbors became concerned about the multitude of different men visiting at various times to help renovate the space. Moreover, as an African-American woman, Stewart was not warmly welcomed into this first space. As Barbara Lee Horn writes, "Now, number 321 had been an all-white building, and the tenants liked it that way." Further provoked by the comings and goings, they accused Stewart of running a bordello, 15 men in 1 hour, and asked the health department to issue a summons for prostitution. The health department was contacted, but rather serendipitously, the inspector who arrived happened to be an old vaudevillian. He gave Stewart a tip that getting a license for a coffee house was much easier than getting one for a theater. So MaMa became Café MaMa. Coffee and cake was served, admission was free, and any remuneration that the actors received came from passing the hat. Stewart's freelance fashion designs and seamstress jobs subsidized the theater during its first decade. This first space was 20 by 30 feet with earthy red walls. The house sat 25 people and the dirt floor was planked with orange crates. There was one set piece, a bed. The initial purpose of the space as a boutique quickly vanished. As Stewart said, "Once our theater got started, I didn't have the discipline to sew. I was too busy doing other things, not writing or directing, but just doing theater." The plays ran for 1 week from Wednesday Saturday, and major critics definitely did not come. Even as of Café MaMa was opened and closed 10 times during its first year. Although neighbors' fears concerning Stewart's supposed brothel had been quelled, fire inspectors often found violations at the theater, which created serious legal problems. Stewart herself was arrested twice, and several other times under another alias. Problems with fire code violations at Café MaMa's first home led Stewart to search for a second home. In 1963, the café was closed by the buildings department due to a violation of a zoning ordinance. La MaMa etc. Café La MaMa moved into its second home, a loft, above a florist shop, at 82 2nd Avenue, on June 28, 1963. Ironically, 1 month after opening, Stewart was informed by the buildings department that she had to vacate this new home because she was serving coffee and making profits. Stewart simply stopped serving coffee and started to charge an admission of 50 cents. On March 12, 1964, Café La MaMa was officially renamed La MaMa Experimental Theatre Club. The passing of the hat ceased after this transition from café to a private club with membership. Unfortunately, even as a private club, this space, like the first, was often harassed by certain civic authorities, which frequently interrupted performances. This second space was about 5 times larger than the original home and could hold up to 74 people. The space was 20 by 50 feet high, and had a one-step stage that was 20 by 8 feet. This is the space where La MaMa etc. truly became a type of tiny theatre centre. Stewart created a policy of presenting new plays only, a new play each week. During this time, playwrights Lanford Wilson and Sam Shepard joined the group. This space is also where Stewart started another ritual of sitting outside on La MaMa's steps during performances to make sure that civic authorities didn't interrupt plays in progress. Because of building code violations, La MaMa was forced to relocate yet again in November 1964. All of La MaMa's relocations were initiated by the buildings department inspector, who would then contact the fire department inspector, who would then contact the police department to come and issue a summons for Stewart's arrest. In order to avoid a third conviction in NY, which would have legally made her a felon, Stewart quickly moved La MaMa to a new space with the audience's help. Stewart recalls, "It was the closing performance of Balls, Paul Foster's play. There must have been 35 people who came to see the play. Many of them had never been there before. I told him just to strike the cafe. Many didn't know what I meant, but they all saw the others picking up chairs and tables. Everybody picked something up and followed me down the street. We took everything, paintings, tables, chairs, coffee pots, everything. Well, they moved me in 1 hour." The audience movers followed Stewart as she led them to the second floor of 122 2nd Avenue, La MaMa's third home and space. Word of mouth. On November 11, 1964, La MaMa etc. opened at 122 2nd Avenue with The Wedding Panda by David Novak. This third space was 23 by 75 feet with a 12-foot ceiling. The stage at the back end was 23 by 10 feet. The seating capacity was technically 74, but the theatre crammed in 115 people at a time. This new larger size attracted artists who had previously worked at other tiny off-Broadway venues, but were now ready for a larger space in which they could expand their ideas. For instance, Lanford Wilson's Balm in Gilead, which needed stage space for 25 people, and was also the first full-length play written for off-Broadway, opened at this third space. Partially due to previous legal struggles, the performances at 122 2nd Avenue were largely publicized by word of mouth. The theatre had no sign. In fact, only the street-level door was labeled 122 Delivery Entrance. There were weekly listings of the productions in the Village Voice, but an address or a phone number was never advertised. Only members could attend shows, and to become a member one had to go to 122 2nd Avenue in person. While this procedure may seem unorthodox, by 1967 there were an estimated 3,000 members. Furthermore, in 1967 La MaMa etc. received not-for-profit status. La MaMa stayed at this third location until 1967, almost 3.5 years. This amount of time was crucial in La MaMa's establishment and audience development. Nevertheless, La MaMa moved again when this third space's lease expired in April 1968. Final home. The second floor at St. Mark's Place acted as a transitional space for La MaMa etc. from January to March 1969, and at last on April 2, 1969. The theatre found a final home, using its first grants from the Ford, Rockefeller, and Doris Duke Foundations. La MaMa etc. found permanent residency at 74A East 4th Street. This final home's ground floor is a theatre which seats 100 people. Originally named the La MaMa Repertory Theatre, the theatre is today known as the First Floor Theatre. The second floor theatre was a 75-person capacity cabaret called the La MaMa Experimental Club. As funding continued, the third floor became a rehearsal space and a workshop. Finally, the top floor was turned into an apartment for Stewart. In 1970, a decaying 7-story loft building at 47 Great Jones Street was purchased using Ford Foundation money for additional rehearsal space. In 1974, when the historical off-Broadway movement was ending, La MaMa expanded operations to 66 East 4th Street, which is 2 doors away from the ETC headquarters. At first referred to as the Annex, this edition is a 299-seat flexible space theatre, with an upper floor that acts as a dormitory for visiting artists. The space had previously acted as a 48 by 100 feet television soundstage with 30 feet high ceilings. In 2009, the Annex was renamed the Ellen Stewart Theatre. International influence. To date, La MaMa has presented artists from over 70 nations. Tours in conjunction with constantly changing venues in NYC. La MaMa also traveled across the world in its early history. Stewart wanted publicity for her playwrights, but she wasn't getting it in New York City, due partly to La MaMa's hit-or-miss quality, and due partly to the short runs of productions. There was also a lack of standards to judge the dedicated devotion to novelty of La MaMa productions. Upon hearing that Danish and other European cities reviewed most productions presented in their countries, Stewart decided that if she could establish positive press and a reputation in Europe, then NYC would definitely take notice. As a result, in the fall of 1965, with 22 plays and 16 young actors, La MaMa had its first European tour, beginning its internationalist influence. La MaMa had 2 troupes. The first troupe, headed by Tom O'Hagan, went to Copenhagen for 6 weeks and was incredibly successful. The Danish audience was interested in the troupe's passion and energy, and the troupe was invited back the following year. The other troupe, led by Ross Alexander, went to Paris for 6 weeks. Unfortunately, Jean-Claude Van Itali's play America Hurrah was found obscene in Paris, and the reviews were terrible. Nevertheless, this first tour met its mission. The troupe returned to NYC with several positive Danish reviews. A second European tour occurred from September-December in 1966, hailed again by O'Hagan and 10 actors, and a third European tour took place from June-November in 1967. Cultural ambassador. The La MaMa troupes did not solely bring La MaMa plays to Europe, but they also brought plays that were first presented at other off-Broadway venues. For example, they brought home Free, The Madness of Lady Bright, and Miss Victoria from Café Chino, as well as Bird Bath and Chicago from Theatre Genesis. Thus, La MaMa acted as international ambassadors, not just for La MaMa, but for New Village playwriting generally. La MaMa has extended past these European tours. There have been satellite La MaMas all over the globe in Boston, Amsterdam, Bogota, Israel, London, Melbourne, Morocco, Munich, Paris, Tokyo, Toronto and Vienna. As of 2006, only a few carried the La MaMa name, including La MaMa Bogota, La MaMa Tel Aviv, La MaMa Melbourne, and La MaMa Umbria. La MaMa Umbria, in Spoleto, Italy, is an artist's retreat and cultural centre founded in 1990 by Stewart, and funded by her MacArthur grant money. Since 2000, Stewart has held a 3-week international symposium for directors at La MaMa Umbria. Moreover, Stewart has often created site-specific productions around the world. In 1981, she directed Romeo and Juliet on the grounds of Leopoldskron Castle in Salzburg, Austria, and in 2004, she directed Trojan Women in 2004, at the ruins in Gardzinus, Poland. The La MaMa tours not only led to future international connections, but also imprinted young experimental playwrights' writing, and the acting style that grew out of O'Hagan's leadership, all across the world. Furthermore, the La MaMa tours led Stewart to create cross-cultural exchanges. She brought many notable artists to NYC, including the Polish director Jerzy Grotowski in 1969, and the Romanian director Andrei Serban in 1970.